Are we allowed to photograph and stuff?
She said so. Okay, we're at Chinsegut Hill in Hernando County, north of Brooksville. This is the Manor House. And we're going to take the tour and let the docent explain everything to us. So, get ready for the ride. You guys are still set up for Christmas. That's nice.
It comes down Monday.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
She still got her tree up.
Yeah, I have taken one down. Okay. I've got my son and my youngest son and his friends are here picking up sticks.
It looks like they're having fun.
I saw, running around with the go-kart or whatever it is. Nice. So we're here with the mayor of Brooksville.
That's awesome.
That is
good for you. Go, girl.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, girl power. Yeah.
Girl power.
Yeah, well, we've got a few.
Here we are.
So the property was first homesteaded in 1842 as part of the Armed Occupation Act of Florida. It was during the resettlement of the Indians, and they told the Indians to come over here to Citrus, Hernando, North Pasco. There was about a 200-mile block that they had promised to the Indians, and said if they would just come over here, they could have that and be fine. Well, then they got over here and decided maybe they didn't want them here, and actually started shipping them out of state. And so as part of helping them decide to leave this area, they passed the Armed Occupation Act, which basically said if you would, they give you 160 acres at the end of 5 years if you would build yourself some sort of dwelling that you were actually living in. You had to have at least a 5-acre garden, and then you needed to shoot whatever Indians came around. So,
That was a requirement.
the end of the 5 years. Well, and the point was they were hoping then that the Indians would not come near you, that they would just agree to the resettlement. Interestingly enough, when you look back at the documentation of the Indians that were moved, it ended up costing the government the equivalent of about $75,000 per Indian to get them out of the area. So, not the most exciting and fun part of our history, but is definitely what started a lot of these places around the state. And you'll notice when you look at the oldest homes in Brooksville, that for the most part they're going to be on the top of the hill, like this one was. So the Saxon house, the Maystringer house, you look, they're all up on a hill. And that way you knew who was coming to visit, and if you need to get out your tea or get out your gun. So they would have obviously better visibility. But Colonel Pearson, Byrd Pearson, came and established this property, and we think that his home is under what is our kitchen right now. We wouldn't know that with that excavation, but they're pretty sure based on the letters and information that went back and forth that was where that original cabin was. And he only lived here long enough to get the deed for the 5 years. And then as soon as he had the land in his own name, he sold it to Colonel Ederington, who came here from South Carolina. He had a plantation there that he'd inherited from his parents, and he moved here with almost all of his slaves. He gave them the option to come or not come, and most all of them ended up coming with him. And this was run as a sugar cane plantation as well as citrus. So they're the ones that actually built the manor, and most of the wood that was used for the house was wood from the property. So I can't even remotely imagine the amount of people that it had to take to get this thing put up. But it is pretty similar, the way that it looks today, to how it looked when they built it starting in 1847. They moved here. They had 11 children by the time they were done. And several of them did not live very long, and so that's the cemetery that's over to the side, are Ederingtons and Snows, which was the next family. Carol, the oldest daughter, Charlotte, married Dr. Snow, and so Charlotte Ederington married Dr. Snow, and then this became their house. So it's 2 different last names, but it's still essentially the same family.
Snow Memorial Highway.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And they named this place Snow Hill. Byrd Pearson had called it Mount Airy because if you notice when you're walking around outside, there is pretty much always a breeze, and that happens year round. Now, of course, in the summer it's not quite so cool, but there pretty much is always a breeze. And then it became Chinsegut Hill with the last owners, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So this parlor would have been originally a parlor with the Ederingtons, but when the Snows were here, they converted it into a dental office. Snow, besides running the plantation, was also a doctor, and so this is where you would have come to get your teeth pulled. And then after the Snows, the last owner, the Robins, had it as a parlor for a little while, and then converted it into a bedroom, which they did for a lot of the rooms because they had so many visitors all the time. This was actually the room that Colonel Robins used for his final bedroom in his older life, and this is the room that he passed away in. So it's like your own house where usages change. I like this room because it has the most detailed history of all the different things that happen in here. Most of the artwork as we go through the house was left by the Robinses. Margaret Robins was a daughter of German immigrants, and so a lot of the artwork is European in nature, and that's somewhere in Germany. It's written in German on the bottom. Still working on translations for everything, but that was a piece of hers. And then all of the dishes and whatever furniture that we have in the original is also the Robinses. So this was theirs, those chairs.
That is cool.
This chair and these chairs are original to Brooksville, but not to this particular.
You don't usually see that. You usually see period pieces, but not the actual
ones.
And that's really cool.
You'll like the ones in the next room then. So as I said, we went from Mount Airy to Snow Hill to then the word Chinsegut Hill. Chinsegut is a Inuit Eskimo word that means spirit of lost things. And Colonel Robins bought this place with his sister Elizabeth. They had not been raised together as children. Elizabeth was the oldest of 7, and Raymond was the youngest. And when he was 3, his mom was institutionalized with what we think was schizophrenia. The father was very overwhelmed, not just by the mom's mental health, but also some financial ruin. And then they'd had several children that passed away. And so he just shipped the kids off to different places. Elizabeth ended up in finishing school, and Raymond, as a 3-year-old, lived off and on with different people, and then ended up actually here in Brooksville with cousins who had moved from Kentucky thinking it would be a great idea to grow oranges, but they didn't know anything about what they were doing. So they really relied on what at that point then would have been freed slaves to help them know how to do this. And the grove is just that direction, just a little bit that way. And so Raymond would come here as a child and play. And he told one of the slaves who had kind of adopted him as a pseudo-dad, his name was Fielder Harris, and he taught Raymond how to ride horses and shoot things and take care of the land. He told him that someday he was going to buy this property and he would come back and find Fielder and take care of him for the rest of his life. So he was very committed as a child to make that happen. The problem was there was no money. So when he was 14, he ran off and went to Tennessee to become a coal miner. He quickly realized that making $1 a day, working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, was not going to get him the fortune that he needed to buy this house. He also realized at that point how little control the workers had over anything. That was at the beginning of the labor movement. So he and some other workers decided it'd be a great idea to go to their boss and ask for half a day off a week so they could wash their clothes and see daylight. And they all got fired and replaced with inmates. So he realized he was not going to be able to really do anything as a miner, and ended up going to California and becoming an attorney so that he could start fighting for the labor movement through the legal process. From there, he got antsy, which he did a lot, and decided he wasn't going to make the money quick enough that way either, and so he went to Alaska for the gold rush as part of, in 1897, as part of what was going on in Nome. Nome was a pretty uncontrolled area. Everybody was, you would there were random shootings. People would get up there thinking they were going to make their fortune, but they weren't really equipped to live in that kind of climate. So you had typhoid and all other kinds of diseases killing people all the time, and then there was really no governmental structure because nobody had been living there. And then all of a sudden you have tens of thousands of people, and it was utter chaos. So for the first year, Raymond did mine for gold, and then after that he got involved in helping form the government. He ran a hospital, and he ended up working for a church to help with relief efforts. So he quickly got distracted from his goal of becoming a millionaire up there. His sister, at this point, was 37 years old. She got worried he was never going to come back. And so she was living in London at the time. She took a boat from London to New York, and then went from New York to Canada, and then from Canada went to Alaska to get there to basically bribe him to come home. And she told him that if he would leave Alaska, that she would give him the $5,000 that he needed to buy this property. So he stayed there long enough to just tie up some loose ends, and then ended up coming home about a year later and buying this place.
Nice.
Their intention, and again going back to the name Chinsegut, Spirit of Lost Things, was they wanted to refine that family connection. His extended usage of the word was, he said, this is the place where things that were lost are found again. And it was the place where they were supposed to be able to come away and just kind of relax a little bit. He was involved in so many different things and always had people wanting him to do things, and he never would turn people away. And so because of that, he did not eat regularly, he did not sleep barely at all, and he would end up either putting himself in the hospital because he got sick, or he would end up institutionalized for a little bit because he just was losing it. And so this was their place. Instead of ending up in a hospital somewhere, they would come here, and this was supposed to be the place where they got rejuvenated. This fireplace was put in when the house was built, and these boxes are not for sitting on, and they would not have had all these pillows on them. It's for your wood. And so the wood was brought in the morning by the slaves or the servants, depending on the time period, and they almost would have always had a fire going on year-round. Even though it's Florida, and even though it's almost always hot, the low fire would have helped with the humidity in the house and just cut some of that down. And so they almost always had a fire going.
So that's what I'll do from now on.
Now you know.
Get me a fireplace and run a fire in it.
These chairs are also the Robinses, and as we go through, there's a really interesting trend. They loved this spooling. Somebody loved this spooling. But so you'll see it on a lot of the chairs, but really none of them match. So we have all of these random chairs that have the same sort of thing, but are not actually a set. I don't know what the motivation was there. This desk came to us from the Snow family. It belonged to the first postmaster in Brooksville, who ended up being connected to the Snows. McCown was the first postmaster in the 1880s, and this is where he would have sorted everything before sending it out. The items on the desk are related to the Robinses. Besides Raymond's work with the labor movement, he also was an advisor to 5 presidents, and was an international traveler. And so we have several biographies of him, and then his wife Margaret, I haven't told you about yet, was he met her when he was giving a speech on the social justice, social gospel of Jesus. And he had just bought this house with Elizabeth, and they were coming to live here as brother and sister. And it was in April, they'd already bought the house, and by June he'd married Margaret. And so all of a sudden now, instead of brother and sister moving in, you also had a wife. Margaret was 37 when they married, and Raymond was in his 30s. And she was the president of the National Women's Trade Union, as well as the president of the Chicago Women's Trade Union. And she was very much at the forefront of the women's suffrage movement and also child labor laws. So they were very connected in sorts of things that they were involved in. And then the other bio is, we've got 2 on Elizabeth. The sister, as I said, she was living in London for most of her life. She was an actress who started her career in Boston, fairly successful, and then decided to go to London, where she became the premier actress for the Henry Ibsen plays. That was the first time that his things were being brought over to England, and so she was the heroine in most of those, and really raised the level of his productions over there.
Have you read any of the books?
I have.
I'm a huge reader.
Yes, this one is super fascinating. This one I've finished completely. This focuses a lot on his time in Russia, which we'll talk about when we get upstairs. And then this one on Elizabeth is great. It's just super sad. She was very independent. Their parents were first cousins, and they think and there was already some of that in the family past.
Yeah.
And so they were thinking that some of the mom's mental issues, and which then also was passed on to several of their siblings, was connected to that. And so they had made a promise to their grandmother as kids that they would never have children if they got married, which none of them did. There were 7 kids, none of them ever had kids. But Elizabeth did get married to a guy who was also an actor, George Parks, and he just kept following her, basically convinced her to marry him, and then once they were married, he wanted her to stop acting. And she didn't want to do that, and she didn't want to have kids, and so he ended up committing suicide. He put on a suit of armor and went to the top of a bridge and then jumped off, and then wrote her a letter and said, "You don't have to worry about me being in your shadow anymore."
If you're going to commit suicide, how else would you do it? I mean,
Wow. Why not?
jump into a wheat combine, but
That is my favorite book.
That comes up.
Yes. And that you can find most of these on Amazon. They're not in print anymore, but they are, the hardbacks are available used on Amazon. And then a lot of the things that Elizabeth wrote, she wrote about 12 books. Most of them are available on Kindle for free, and they're fiction. But this is one that she wrote that I read really slowly because I didn't want to get to the end of it. But it's about when she goes to Alaska to find him. And it's just the sweetest story. She has a great style, very transparent for writing 100 years ago, and just the sweet dynamics of the relationship of the two of them. So it took me, I had like 2 chapters left, and I waited them up.
I read, and it's like, okay, 2 pages tonight. You get to the end, and you have to go through this process before you can start another book.
Right. But he would not let her publish that while they were both alive. He asked her not to publish it. And so they gave it to Virginia Woolf, who she was friends with, Virginia and Leonard Woolf, and she asked them to publish it after they passed. So after Raymond died in 1954, and Elizabeth had died the prior decade, and so Leonard and Virginia Woolf were actually the ones that published this for them.
Thanks.
But most of her work was fiction, and she was kind of insert her life into it. Both of these are fiction that she had written, and both of those actually are about the time in Alaska. But in addition to her acting, she also was involved in the suffrage movement. She wrote the first play ever written about women's suffrage. It was called Votes for Women, and it was first put on in England and then eventually brought over here to the States. She also, 2 of her books were turned into movies, into silent films, but a lot of those silent films did not survive, and unfortunately others did not. But this is a picture of Margaret, or a painting of her that was done later in life, and she stepped right in and got involved in everything that Raymond was doing. As I said, she'd already kind of been doing some of that. She came into the marriage with $600,000, and that really helped sustain a lot of the things that they were trying to do during their life. She was a big musician. She played the piano and the violin, and we've got a whole box of her sheet music that I'm still trying to figure out how to get safely displayed, but I like to have this one out. This was given to them by the Hull House. The Hull House was a settlement house in Chicago. It was part of the settlement movement of the early 1900s, and what they would do is they would have wealthy people come and live in neighborhoods, and then have poor people in the same neighborhood to try to raise the level of services for the poor, kind of what we do with busing and that kind of thing for schools.
Okay.
And so the whole house was run by Jane Addams, who is the most famous person running the settlement houses. And then Margaret and Raymond actually in Chicago. And so when they weren't here, they were in Chicago at that settlement house running that. But this one's neat because it has basically all the little fight songs that they would have done when they were doing their marches. You see it's suffrage and the child labor laws and labor movement kind of stuff.
I think you got a customer.
And it's, as I said, this was donated to them by that. Hey!
I turned your boys loose because I thought,
Yeah, Jason's gonna come get them because I've got a tour. I got a little while longer to go.
no,
I was gonna leave them, but not just pretty. I'm only halfway through the tour. But thank you. Did they work good?
yeah,
Uh-oh.
they're good.
That didn't sound convincing.
They had a lot of fun.
Oh, good.
They're really good.
Well, hopefully it was productive fun.
I'm gonna go down the mall and eat something, and come back and do some work. It's still a long way.
Oh, I'm sure. Thank you, Dennis.
And Brian said he was gonna work from noon on. Did you talk to him?
He is supposed to be coming up. Yeah,
Right.
I haven't seen him yet.
Yeah, he was with us.
Oh,
Working. Yeah.
good. Good. So this room was originally part of the porch, as was upstairs, and they were both enclosed by Margaret. She was trying to fit, and if you stand right here, this is the best spot. So this is your wall. She was trying to fit a baby grand piano into this dining room, and that wasn't working so well for her. So Raymond had taken a trip to Australia on some speech campaign, and while he was gone, she hired a contractor and had the porch enclosed, which was not, did not make him too happy when he got home, but there really wasn't much he could do about it. It was already done at that point. But the neat thing about this space is that they did convert it into a music room. We don't have her piano. Her baby grand was eaten up by termites, the way that this floor was as well in the years that it was left unopened. But they would have church services in here most Sundays, unless they were having them down at the Altar Oak, which is the second tree down. The neat thing about their services is that they always had them with their staff. We're pretty sure this is the site of the first interracial church services in the county. And then also, Raymond had become a minister, a licensed minister during his time in Alaska. And so he would give the sermons unless he was gone, which was pretty frequently. And so when he was gone, Margaret gave the sermons. So you had a female minister and blacks and whites in the same service in the early 1900s, which was super cool.
In the South.
Yes. And they were very concerned about relations between blacks and whites. As I said, Raymond did find Fielder when he came back and bought the house. So he actually made him the manager of the estate, which ticked off a lot of people. There was a recession going on, and so you had a lot of unemployed white men, and people were upset that they had hired a black man to do a white man's job. And he would always answer the same way, that Fielder was the most honest and capable man he knew, and that was the end of it. So they had a way of definitely bucking the system, and being brave in the things that they felt good about. These windows came from a cabinet that was in the hallway that housed a lot of Margaret sheet music, and I don't know what happened to the cabinet. I wasn't here during the renovation, but I guess it's still I don't know. The dishes in here did belong to Margaret. We have 5 sets of her dishes, including this one, which we have this piece here so that you can see somebody made her this bread cover to match those particular dishes.
Wow.
And then we put these ones out because we thought they looked Christmassy, but we cycle through the different patterns that she had. And you can see her initials. There's different ones. Some of them just say MD for Margaret Dreyer, because like I said, she was 37 when she got married, so she would have already had her own silver at that point. And then the MDR for when she was married, Margaret Dreyer Robins.
Oh man, it's incredible.
Thank you.
We go to a lot of these types of houses, and this is I was saying that when we walked out initially after our first conversation. It's like really furnished. I mean,
Thank you.
you guys kick butt. And that was pretty well furnished, and I've been there before, and they're renovating it right now, but I don't know, it's just not, you don't have the stuff that belonged to him. You have period stuff.
Right.
And it's just not,
That does make a difference.
I don't know, it's just not laid out the same.
These are two of Margaret's pieces. This one we haven't hung up yet, but that's from Russel's. That's a shot from Russel's. And then I just love this piece, so we gotta get them shifted around.
This is right around the corner.
Oh, baby.
We're headed out.
Oh, I just read about that yesterday. I'd been out there before and I read her book,
Okay.
but I want to go back out because I understand there's some ruins out there which we haven't seen before.
Okay.
But yeah, I just read about that cookbook yesterday. That's crazy.
That is crazy. I teach
'Cause I was just
2 miles from here.
Oh, good. Hey, Ryan.
So Dennis said you're staying till 4?
No. I said until I'm done with my tour.
Oh.
He's hard of hearing.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes. No. Just till I'm done with the tour. So maybe another 30 minutes.
I gotta go change
Actually,
because I'm a little sweaty.
You're good. So this piece is important because we have 10 pieces of art from this artist in the house. This is done by Mary Kugler, who was a local. The Kuglers are one of the founding families of Brooksville, and Mary was a contemporary of Margaret and her friend. And she would actually come and stay here for extensive periods of time after her husband passed, even though her house is just 5 minutes away. But we're pretty sure that at least 3 of them were painted of Chinsegut. So this one we think is the Revelation Trail, which is down further that way. It's gotten darker over the years, and if we can find an artist that really knows what they're doing, we may get it lightened, but it makes me nervous. But we're not sure if we have so many of her paintings because she would just give them to Margaret because she was staying here, or if Margaret just kept buying them. Margaret was one of 5 kids. 2 of her sisters were artists. One of them had a gallery in New York City that was pretty successful, so we know that she loved art. So I'm not sure if she was her benefactor or if she just kept being given the pictures. But Mary did have a showing at Margaret's sister's gallery in New York City in the 30s, and we've got a lot of documentation back and forth on the letters of which paintings were going and how that was going to work. But we're actually going to do an art show of Mary's things and try to collect as much as we can in the fall in September, and we'll have, hopefully people will lend us their things. Her art studio that's downtown has actually been turned into a bed and breakfast. And be over there and find out if he actually has some things. This is another one of her paintings here in the restroom. And this was done of a flower arrangement that Margaret had made and then Mary painted. And sometimes she signs it Mary Kugler, and then sometimes it's just the MAC. But the bathrooms were put in 1911. So the house has been around for quite a long time without plumbing. And there's 4 of them. There's this one on this floor, 2 on the 2nd floor, and 1 on the 3rd floor. All of them have the shorter clawfoot tub. Normally you want to bring your tubs in before you've got the walls put up. But obviously with the house being years old at the time, that was not an option. And so they brought all the shorter tubs, which if I had to carry them, I would have too. They're very obnoxious. And then the electricity did not actually come in until the 30s. So the house was almost 100 years old before they had electricity. Alright, so if you guys like old houses, can you tell me why we got this window in the closet?
The window in the closet?
A child slept in there.
Not that big of a closet. I mean, I suppose you could look at it on the floor. No?
I'm still trying to figure out why you got the chimney running up through the window out there.
Oh, yeah, we'll get to that too. But this actually has 3 really great purposes. Number 1, remember we don't have electricity, so it let in some light.
Okay.
And then also it helps cut down on molds and mildews because it, again, provides some light. And then the 3rd reason is our fireplace for the dining room is downstairs below there. And a lot of times your fires are going to start in the walls behind the fireplace. Hopefully this would have alerted them a little quicker if there was a fire going on.
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Isn't that funny?
Have
They
you?
were very clever.
No,
Okay, good.
I've never.
Not just me.
Clever people. Well, that's true.
This is unusual for South Central Florida to have a house this big still existing. I mean, it's really cool.
So this is another one of Mary's that we are pretty sure was painted here. And then this one I love, even though something ate it. And I'm so grateful to whatever ate it because it left all the faces intact. Like I feel like all the important parts are still there. Isn't that extraordinary?
That's cool.
She really had great taste in art. There's only one piece that I wouldn't have bought myself, but for the most part, just love the things that she chose. And all of the knickknacks, like everything small that you see here was from the family,
Nice.
other than the books. The books, Raymond had 8,000 books. They're all at the University of Florida. And as a reader, it was beyond stressful to me that there were no books in this house, especially when you knew the people were readers and writers. So my parents, as I said, have a bed and breakfast, and my mom brought 401 books, period books, from her collection
Wow.
down here, and we've put them all around. The only requirement was that they be something that was from, couldn't be any older than 1842 and couldn't be any newer than 1954. So we just tried to have ones that would have been. All of the pictures in here were done by Mary. That's my favorite. I say that actually usually.
Oops. That triggered something.
I started volunteering with events in April, and then when they let Christy go in August is when I started doing tours. But so most of my information is from the books, and then we have binders of letters to and from the family. I mean,
Nice.
so much information, and I'm a reader, and I love it. Yeah, so, and it's so fascinating. It's also fascinating. So that's where. Thank you. And just notice these. The wood was dark, and when they did the remodel, they painted it white. I'm hoping that we at some point can figure out how to undo that because it's a lot harder to see the detail in the woodwork. But we're pretty sure this is the room that Elizabeth would have stayed in when she came to visit. She did not end up being here quite as often as probably originally intended. Partly because you're in London, it's not like it's that easy of a jaunt, but also with the marriage things, just the dynamics change when you have a wife and two really strong women. All right, so stand here, and if you're OCD, you get quickly annoyed. That is not centered. True. And when we were trying to hang that artwork, I had my friend here who's a designer, because I know when things look good, but I don't know how to make them look good necessarily. And we had the longest discussion on whether you center the piece to the wall or to the bed, or so we did neither. We just kind of did a little mix of both and tried to make it look okay, because we can't move the bed. This furniture in this room, the dressers, the nightstand, the bed, belong to Raymond and Elizabeth's grandparents, so it's well over 200 years old. And as they got older, Margaret was having trouble getting into the bed. There's no mattress on here, so obviously you gotta make it higher. And so, they would use stools, but Raymond had had an accident and was partially paralyzed. And so instead of raising the bed, they drilled holes in the floor and dropped the bed down into the floor. So it is perpetually, forever going to be
cool.
not centered.
That's cool.
And I usually mention this downstairs, but as we went through the house, every single room other than the parlor has outdoor access to the porch. So everybody has their own exit. And they all had screens on them so that you could just leave it open and you would always have that nice cross breeze going. I'm not a huge fan of these pictures just because they're mismatched. This is Raymond as a young man, and this is Margaret in an older age. It makes it look like he married his mother. He didn't. But for whatever reason, those are the ones that they ended up framing. So I'd really like to get a different picture of Margaret. It's a little better match. match. Here's another one of our school chairs.
Oh.
This quilt was theirs. And then this handle, were at one point 30 of these handles around the house. Raymond was up trimming a eucalyptus tree, and a thunderstorm started, and he kind of jumped a little bit at the thunder and fell out of the tree and was partially paralyzed. They gave him 3 months to live, I assume because some kind of infection was setting in. He said that was ridiculous. He was not going to live for 3 more months. He had a lot to do. So he lived for 21 more years. Eventually was fully confined to a wheelchair, but for a long time did little things like this just to help him move around. So he went out to the hardware store, about 30 of these, and installed them all around the house to help him with things. And that's why we have a handle on the fireplace.
That's like early handicap access stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I could use that. When my knees are getting anymore, just get right on down there.
And this fireplace, all the way down, the first floor, this one, and the third floor, this was installed by the Robinses. So that's why it goes through the bay window. They decided not to take the windows out. They wanted to keep the look of the house the same, but they wanted to get this additional fireplace in. Again, there's no electricity. There was no... so there would have been no heat on this end of things. There's a fun story for this cabinet and a boring story for the cabinet, so I'll start with the boring one. Boring story is that it was built from wood on property. The reason that we don't necessarily buy the boring story is because woodworkers that have come through have, without prompting, told us that this is cedar of Lebanon, which would not be anything that we would have been growing here. It fits in then better with the more fun story, which is that this was a gift from Vladimir Lenin to Raymond Robins. He was sent over to Russia after the death of the Tsar and at the beginning of the Bolshevik government. And the government was not recognizing them officially, and so didn't want to have an official ambassador. And so what they did was they appointed Raymond as the head of the Red Cross. And so he was there for the Red Cross to help with relief efforts, but he met with Lenin 3 or 4 times a week for the entire time that he was there. He was actually the only American meeting with Lenin.
Is that true?
It is true.
Wow.
In fact, the Reform and Revolution book that I told you about downstairs really heavily details, I think it's probably somebody's doctoral thesis, but it really heavily documents all of his involvement there in Russia. So he and Lenin, because they were that involved, ended up forming a good respect for each other. We have plenty of documentation that says that Raymond did not believe in communism or socialism, that they were not really ultimately good for the workers, but he respected their right to choose their own government, and he respected Lenin as a human being. And so after his time there, the story is that this cabinet was waiting back here for him when he got here. In that Reform and Revolution book, we have letters from Raymond talking about how he's traveling on the Tsar's train. He's staying in homes that belong to the Tsar. So it's very possible that this was in one of the places that he stayed, and then Lenin sent it home for him. So I like that story a whole lot better than it being built here. But even still, without it, the relationship was still there, and he did spend a lot of time in Russia doing these things. This is Margaret's dress, and this was Raymond's tuxedo.
Wow.
And I just think this is the most extraordinary wood. The whole velvet finish of the whole thing is just...
That might have belonged to a czar.
It might have. And I love that whole time period.
Yeah.
So when I was little, that was the first...
So does she, but she likes
time period
the...
that I got into was reading about Tsar Nicholas and his family and all of those things. I loved studying that. So, but it is pretty... Not that fancy, though. So I don't know. But... it's a good story. So these are most of the books that my mom had brought, and then another piece of her artwork. And then we have these
cool.
weights. He did spend time, they did live in Chicago for quite a while, so that would have been his. And then I forget, this is, I think, Mount Vernon. I think it's Mount Vernon, which he would have been in D.C. quite a bit.
Yeah, we were just there over the summer. We didn't actually take the tour because we didn't have time. I'd been there before. Have you ever been there? They changed it a lot. They Disneyfied it basically. It used to just be the building like this.
Okay.
Only, you know, it was restored, you'd go through it and all that. But they've made all sorts of structures and museums around, but I'm kind of old school.
So it was pretty fun when my mom was putting them up here. She was sorting out, you know, where to put everything, and a lot of the things that she would get, she goes to library sales and buys things that they were discontinuing, and it's amazing because a lot of these are first editions. So yeah, we may just, if things start going sour, we may sell a couple of these books. Since they're not the family's, since they're mine, we might as well keep ourselves in business by selling a couple of these things. But right now, I'm just happy that their bookshelves are full.
Yeah, and it looks really, really good. Where's your parents' bed and breakfast? Is that
Pennsylvania.
Oh, Pennsylvania.
What part of PA?
Just south of Erie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was born in Pittsburgh and lived there till I was 12, and then they moved to this place called Cambridge Springs, which was a mineral springs hot spa kind of place. They had like 8 hotels. There's 2,000 people in 8 hotels. But they bought the town banker's house and turned it into a bed and breakfast. But we're using this, this room we just have started on, so that's why it's a little bare, but we're trying to create a kid's bedroom in here. This is one of Mary Kugler's, one of the 2 that we have of her that is chalk drawings. I really like that one, but we're just trying to make this, there would have been a lot of kids here. The Ederingtons had 11, the Snows had 7.
That's neat.
Isn't that fantastic?
That whole thing is neat.
Just love the creative use of space. And
Yeah,
I'm so curious about this. Like, was somebody just having a really creative moment and thought they would make it pretty, or is there some reason for that recess in a closet? I don't know. But I'll tell you the horseshoe story, and it probably is not this horseshoe because this horseshoe looks awfully small, but it's a good reminder of the story that there is to tell. As I said, Raymond and Fielder were very close. He functioned as a pseudo-father to him. And Raymond was an advisor to 5 presidents. The president that he was closest to was Teddy Roosevelt. And he's actually was very instrumental in convincing Roosevelt to run again when he ran later on the progressive ticket. Raymond pretty much harassed him into doing that. And so they continued their friendship throughout the years. And he would always tell President Roosevelt about Fielder. And so the president said, well, you need to bring this guy to come meet me. So Raymond took Fielder on a trip to New York City and showed him around New York and then introduced him to President Roosevelt. And President Roosevelt gave Fielder a horseshoe from his war horse. So that's why I'm thinking this probably isn't it, because it's kind of little for a war horse, I would think, but I don't really know horses. But we do know that he was given a horseshoe from the president.
Nice.
And then there's tons of wood carving stuff that was on Raymond's desk and in his rooms, and these are different things that were in there. And then these are things that we haven't figured out how to safely display yet, so we're keeping them protected until we do an archive paper.
Nice.
But this in here is an Indian little costume that was actually Raymond's. I thought maybe it was Elizabeth's, but it's Raymond's. And then this tambourine was Elizabeth's, and she would take it on all her travels around the world. And you can see she started off at the top writing really big and spacing things out, and by the time she got down to the bottom it was like this, but it has locations and dates. So she writes she's in Paris in whatever June of '97 or whatever, and so this documents all of her
That is so
travels.
raw.
Isn't
That
that
is,
fantastic?
yeah, it's incredible.
So we haven't found a picture of this yet. University of Florida really does have a lot of information, and we had a couple ladies go up there a little bit ago and start photographing some things for us, because I'm hoping maybe we can find something on that would actually tell us a little more, because it's hard to tell.
Crazy.
I'm going to let you loose here after we go to the kitchen.
Okay, cool. Are we following?
I don't know, are we following you?
Yes.
Oh, that's gonna be cool.
Huh? Oh man, this is incredible. This is just about as cool as any place I've ever been. Monticello is probably Monticello is probably the coolest ever.
Sorry.
But that guy was crazy.
Yes.
I mean, he never stopped, and he had so many cool inventions. Ooh.
So we haven't talked yet. Well, let's do this first. Saw you down to the trees. The first tree they called the fireside oak. They would, after they would cure the wood around the property as they cut it down for about a year, and then they would bring it up here. There was a dirt patch where all the wood was stacked, and then the servants would bring it from there into the house in the morning. You're still here?
What?
You're still here?
Yeah?
Oh, I thought Dad was coming to get you. All right, I'm almost done. Then the second tree down is called the altar oak, and that's where they would have their outdoor church services, weddings, any kind of ceremonies they were having. Raymond was given a doctorate under that tree by University of Florida, and they are buried under there. There's
Yeah,
a plaque in the
saw that,
ground
yeah.
that says, into this altar oak are the remains of Margaret and Raymond. And so people have raised an urban legend that they're actually in the tree. If you notice, there was a lot of repair done on that tree. The live oaks get big, they start splitting.
Right.
And so there's braces, and then there's actually concrete in the trunk. There's like 2 columns, and there's concrete like this. So the story was that Raymond is in one side and Margaret's in the other, and they put the bodies in the tree and then put them in there. That's not true. Yes, we have pictures. We know that they were in the ground. But they just meant into the oak, as in, like, you know.
Okay, so they're
They're not
buried
in the
beneath
tree.
the plaque?
They're under the, yes.
Okay, because we were,
I thought maybe it was,
Yeah.
Oh, no, they'd actually looked at cremation. I just found the letters on that last week. They had explored for a long time what it would cost and how the process would be and what would happen because they wanted to be cremated, and then Margaret ended up changing her mind. So, yeah, we just found those. We actually have the originals on those, which we don't have the originals of very much, but we do have the originals of her back and forth on the cremation issue. And then the final tree, the plaque on it says the sunrise oak. That's actually not right. That is the ascension oak. The sunrise oak is that way. But the ascension oak was where Raymond would take the staircase up it. There was a platform which has gotten crushed over the years because the tree got so big. But he would go up there in the morning, watch the sunrise, and do his prayers and drink his coffee, and then come down and have breakfast with whoever was visiting them. And all those other trees, like, you can't see the sunrise from there now because all the other trees have gotten so tall that those
Right.
weren't there. So that was what he did in the morning. And the staircase is really in great shape. Platform, not so much.
so that's the original staircase?
Mhm.
Oh, okay, neat.
The garden, Margaret was, besides her music love and her labor movement love, was also a very passionate gardener, and she loved, we like to call them exotics. People that don't like Margaret call them invasives. She brought around a lot of the things that people are struggling with. So at one point they had 33 kinds of bamboo here. I'm sure you noticed as you came up all the little skinny bamboo that just grows like crazy, and it's really, really troubling.
Our boys still around.
Yes, I saw William go by that way in the cart, but I didn't see the other 2. So they're around.
They must be.
Just yell out. They had 33 kinds of bamboo, which is one of the reasons that they had some of the guests that they had. Edison actually was here for the bamboo. He was looking at bamboo as one of the as an option for filaments, and so because they had so many different types here, that was one of the reasons that he came. And in fact, the other person that was here with him in '29, which is what we did the event based on, was Dr. John Small, who was a botanist, and it probably helped him kind of walk through some of that. But she loved those things, and so they had a gardener. Her name was Lisa, that tended a lot of those things as Margaret would ship them in from around the world. And then the way that they spread is they had visitors all the time, and people would say, "Oh, I like that camphor tree," and so she'd go, "Well, here you go, here's a cutting," and then so all of these things that now aren't so good for the environment or the animals are here because Margaret loved pretty things. So love or hate her, whatever, that's how it worked. But Lisa was very good at taking care of things. She was not actually hired to be the gardener. She was hired to be their housekeeper. She'd come from Germany when she was 18, and they hired her as a housekeeper because Margaret was excited that she had somebody that she could speak German with. Problem was she was a really terrible housekeeper. When you go up to the history room, you'll see there's a picture of her as a young girl holding 2 raccoons. And she would keep her windows open in her bedroom so that the squirrels and the birds and the raccoons could come in and hang out in her bedroom with her. So anybody that lives like that is probably not the person that you want cleaning your house. So they found her that she was much more useful as a gardener. And she lived here until Raymond passed, and then ended up on a property that he'd given her nearby, which is actually the property that he'd grown up on. He ended up buying the property of the orange grove that he'd grown up on as well. By the time he gave this to the government, it was over 2,000 acres. And so he gave a portion of that to Lisa, and she lived there until she passed, which was actually only a few years ago. She was in her 90s.
Wow.
So this is our east wing or annex, and this is actually what the Ederingtons built first. So they did the kitchen, then a couple bedrooms upstairs, and then while the work was still being done on the rest of the manor. And then after they built the manor, this would have been your upper level servants' quarters. There's just 2 bedrooms up there. The one is Lisa's, and then there's a really big room that it seems kind of odd as a bedroom. I'm wondering if they changed it around a little because we can almost use it for space. But you'll see again Raymond's handles.
Yeah, I saw those. Yeah.
Open them and get up.
That is a good idea.
And then going in here, because this is our pantry. We needed a handicap bathroom, and so we converted the pantry into a handicap bathroom, but I love it because we still have one of the original cabinets. And this would have been full of that, and it has its back door access. You can come right in from the garden, or if you're bringing in the chicken you just killed or whatever, that way. And I just think it's neat. But all of the things in here are things that belong to Lisa. She loved to camp around the property and do little camping trips, and so we're going to get those all set up over there. And then this is part of the original foundation of the house from the Ederingtons.
Oh, wow.
We actually have the name of the slave that did the work to cut that beam out. I just cannot imagine, again, like the manpower that this took and the time. It's just extraordinary. And then this is one of the original doors as well.
Wow. That's going back to the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, oh man. Imagine what it was like here in the 40s.
I like to point out this table. We have lots of little pieces of furniture that were done from wood on the property over the years. Isn't that cool?
That little
So
thing.
they could change the level, height. And we've got a bunch of little ones that fold up and that they could just stick away. I think, again, because they just had so many people coming in and out that they wanted movable furniture. So this is your big, huge kitchen. We're still in where we do not have any appliances other than the bathtubs and the sinks from the house. So this stove is period, but it's not from the house. And then I'm kind of sad because we found the inventory from UF from when they first took the property over in '54, and there was an icebox and a sink. So I don't know who took them or why, but I'm not real happy about it because we want them back.
So UF owned this initially?
The Robinses had donated it to the government, and then the government gave control of different portions to different entities. So they gave the land next to us to USDA, and then this property was given to the university for agricultural educational research. UF only stayed here 4 years, and then they gave it to USF, who was here until recently. USF are the ones that built the cottages in the back, and they did have, it essentially had a campus here for quite a while, but they really didn't do much with the Manor House, and that's when it really deteriorated, and they were at the point where they were going to have to tear it down.
Ooh.
Which is when the Friends of Chinsegut was formed, the nonprofit that I'm here with, and they worked with the county to get a $1.5 million grant, and redid the foundation, redid the floors, a lot of that to keep this place open.
This is worth saving.
Oh, yeah.
Huge.
Absolutely.
I mean, unquestionable.
Absolutely. And I forgot at one point, the Snows, when they were here, were still running it as a plantation until the freezes in the 1890s. And
Yeah,
a really
94,
bad one.
95, 96.
In 95, that we have
Yeah.
a picture of. Actually, the lady up the stairs, that the descendant just brought us a new picture that was taken right after the bad freeze, where they actually just shut the whole place
Well, that was
down.
like statewide. I mean, that caused so many towns and everything to just statewide to go
Right.
down those.
So they stopped running it as a plantation then in 95. Charlotte, the mother, had just died, so you have the dad, all of a sudden he has no plantation, he still has his doctor practice, and then a tornado came through and blew the house 6 degrees off the foundation. And instead of repairing it, he just moved to another house on the property, which was over that direction. And so the house was vacant for about 8 years until Raymond came back and bought it.
Oh, wow.
And then he did the repair on the foundation, and I was reading through letters the other day of Margaret's when they first came, and she said they'd been told that the house was ready for them to come, and when they came up the driveway, she said the house was on its side. And I don't know what that means, and I got to figure out what she was talking about, because she said they said it was ready to move into, and it's on its side. So I don't know if that was some kind of jargon
Metaphor,
for still
yeah.
a mess, or if they literally had to pick the house up, I don't know. But all of these things did belong to Raymond and Margaret. She would always give her guests orange juice when they came, and so we've got 3 of her juicers, and a different little paraphernalia. Obviously, you need your dinner bell when you're on property this big. They had a ton of guests all the time, and you'll see when you go upstairs, we're still trying to compile that. But Thomas Edison, J.C. Penney, Harvey Firestone, Harold Ickes, William Jennings Bryan, Helen Keller, Marjorie Killing Rawlings.
Oh, wow. That's right. I read that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. Daniel Poling, I just started reading about him yesterday. He was a minister and a prohibitionist and was helping, Margaret was involved in the prohibition movement. And Margaret also founded our YWCA. She started our first library, which was a traveling library. She founded the Brooksville Women's Club and helped with musical and arts productions. She would often sponsor those. So they were very heavily involved, not just internationally, but here in helping Brooksville prosper as well. Their final big statement that they made on how much they love Brooksville was at the stock market crash. Raymond was the president of the board of the First National Bank, which is now Browning Insurance and Hogan Law Firm, right, that big building right there right downtown. And everybody was making runs on the bank. Obviously there wasn't not going to be the money there. And so he and Margaret gave $200,000 of their money to the bank to keep the bank afloat, essentially keeping the citizens afloat.
Wow.
Which was great and definitely the kind of thing that they did. But it meant when the tax bill came shortly after, they did not have the money to pay their taxes. So he made a deal, worked out a deal with FDR that he would give the property to the government for $1 as long as they were allowed to live here until they passed. That paperwork was finalized in 1933. Margaret lived until 45, and then Raymond lived until 54. So the interesting thing, and I'm so curious how it actually worked, was that even though they were living here, the government immediately took possession of the property. So it was being run as their home, but the government was also here as well. This is one of the first sites of the Civilian Conservation Corps at Roosevelt. So the guys would come, they had all these cabins, which are actually just, you go directly that way on the other tree line. We have 2 of them left. The overseer cabin and the wash house are still there, but they had a bunch of those cabins. The guys would come and sleep here at night and then go out and do the road work and the forestry things and whatever else it was that the Conservation Corps was doing at the time. And so this was run jointly, and that was the time as well as the electricity came in, so I'm pretty sure that that was probably done by the government, just because they came and they were like, yeah, there's no electricity. I don't
That doesn't work for me.
Yeah, so we have tons again of documentation between Ward, who was the man that was over the government running of this property, and Margaret and Raymond trying to figure out how much of the electric bill belonged to who, and
Right.
all of
That would
those
be
different
tough.
things.
The government taking over your home.
Right,
Yeah.
but when they passed.
Wow.
And they had no children.
They had no children.
So there was no one to.
No, the only, they did give property to Fielder. They also built a school for the black children since they weren't allowed to attend the schools that were here. And they gave a bit of property. If you go down 41 on the left, you'll see there's a place called Robins Park. And there's a missionary Baptist church there that they had given for the black community to build that church. I don't know if they actually paid for the church or not. But Raymond gave them that property. And then he gave a Hochi Hill, which had been Bodine Grove, where he grew up, to Lisa the gardener, because she kind of functioned as their daughter.
Right. Cool.
So it got kind of divided up all crazy. And so the conservation has land. This was USDA forever until October of this year, when USDA gave it to Florida A&M University. And the deal is for them that they have to use it for agricultural educational research, and their intent is to use it for raising up young farmers, since most farmers, the vast majority of farmers, are over the age of 60. And then they also want to, they do a lot of research with organic pest control, and so that's going to be their site for that as well.
Cool.
Yeah, so we're excited about having new neighbors and getting that opened up again, because right now it's just sitting there empty and kind of depressing.